there are different buckets of organizing this. And I think there's like the acute moment, like when you're like actively being triggered by something, like there's that situation. What can we do in that situation? I think there's, to me, it feels like the maintenance or the preventative situation. Like if you're, exercising and meditating every day, like that's just a good preventative way to like cope with stress. You're not like acutely meeting any particular situation. And then the category that I added was like pre/post. And I think that comes after like an acute stressful event. But if, for example, like, so Molly, you have your lawyer thing coming up and it's going to be like super stressful, there's maybe stuff you can do like leading up to that can put you in as solid of a place as you can be like during the event. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm just throwing stuff out there. I'm not saying this is what you need to do or what works for you or what would work for anyone, but like going into trance or like, making sure that like you nourish yourself that morning, or like tapping that morning and specifically tapping on what, that specific thing. And then the post or aftercare, I really think about when we go through a stressful event, our brain, unless we actively interfere, will code it according to old patterns. So we might tell ourselves like the wrong story about it, or a less helpful story than if we like sit with it in a very conscious way. And like, so for example, I feel like a stressful event that I ended up kind of doing this with that was really interesting is we went to see a movie with another family. And so it was like two neurodiverse kiddos and then like two families that had somewhat different parenting styles. And the movie was great. And then after the movie, like the two boys, my son and his friend, just started acting like completely bonkers. And so they were like crawling all over the seats and just like running all over the movie theater. And I just remember in the moment, I was like, holy shit, this is stressful. Like, should I do something? Like, are the other parents going to do something? Like, are we going to get in trouble? Are we going to get kicked out? And like, I just remember like my nervous system was like, red alert, red alert. And so like nothing technically bad ended up happening. We ended up leaving. We ended up going to a park. And my system was still coding that as like a problem. It was like, oh my God, we're never going to the movies again. Like, this was horrible. And so then when I sat with it later, I was like, you know what? Let me tell this story differently. Like, nothing bad actually happened. And as hard as it was and as scary as it was, like, I didn't shut my kid down either. So that actually counts as a success. And so like when I like look at this arc in a different way, like it was great. Like we went to the movies, the boys had fun. I'm really proud of my parenting. I didn't do anything that later I would have felt ashamed around. And like ultimately nothing bad happened. Like no one came to talk to us. Like we did not get kicked out. And so then I consciously recoded it as like a successful experience. So that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of like pre and post care.
I think that is an amazing example. Like, yes.
I think
Yes.
the workshop started. And I
Yes.
think that may be similar to all of the ways that we've had conversations and sort of gone into things. We're just going to do that. And like, I love that example, Celestina. I think it's a really important one for the holidays because it's really easy to get into your old habits about the things you didn't do well and then count things as an example of one of those versus an example of, I didn't freak out. I handled it pretty well. We went to the park afterwards as a success, actually.
I think I think that's so powerful. And I think it's really simple or easy or normal to not let that land. And the way that you like to meditate upon it in a different way, like I think it's huge. The implications of learning the skill of after an event to whether it went, I would do the same thing if it had gone awry. So learning the skill to be able, like, once an event is over that has been stressful, no matter what it was, if you can go back and you can meditate on the fact that you actually were okay, you can re-experience it and allow your brain to code it differently. Like, that's $1 million idea. And it's not rocket science. It's just that we don't know how to do it. All we know how to do is go, oh, another terrible event. And we don't realize that we're constantly
Rushing.
coding. That's right.
Thinking of the holidays, it's the rushing because it takes time. It's an integration piece, which no one does anymore because we just don't have the time to like sit and reflect. We're distracted by our devices. Oh my gosh, this is like, we're doing No Screen November and it is blowing my mind. And like, I cannot wait to like write about. But one of the things that I'm realizing with myself is like, when I don't have a phone in front of me, then my brain will naturally move to integration. It will naturally move to reflection. And so, and it is, I think, you know, Molly, you kind of said this, and I'm just going to make it even more explicit. It's also the quality, right? Because there's a way in which an event happens, it's stressful, and you can like ruminate on it and spin yourself up and just be, and there's a way in which you can look back on it and reflect on it in a way that is like contextualizing, and you're in a calm place, the field is nice and wide, and you are taking authority and authorship over the narrative.
That's right.
And you
It's
can
conscious.
Yeah,
It's
with
conscious.
something that didn't technically go well, or something where you realize like you coded it as like a failure, but it actually was pretty great, amazing. So yeah.
Right. This is a really good point too, to just you know, if you haven't heard about memory reconsolidation, it's the way that we use memory reconsolidation to go back to previous events to add information, for instance. So in this case, when something happens, it's actually malleable in our minds for the next few hours. And so, for instance, if something stressful happens to you and you want to, within that time period, reprocess it, you have a whole bunch of hours to do that. But actually, it's not too late if, for instance, you have something right afterwards. You can come in the next day, you can come in 2 days later, you can bring up the event in your mind. So in this case, you know, that moment when Celestina was in the movie theater with the kids and like her nervous system was going like red alert. And then you can consciously bring in feelings about how you did a good job with that situation, how you don't need to code it as a failure of some kind. And that information will come into your memory files and make it so that that is a way that you remember it, and that you have more resilience and honestly more motivation for the next time.
Oh my gosh, that's a good point. And like, not to get too conspiracy theory, but like that just reminds me of a theory that I personally have around how I wonder if humans, again, before like the modern rushing pace and like the technology really interfering with our brains, if humans naturally had memory reconsolidation occur more often, and how we're actually technology and like this pace, because memory reconsolidation is a type of integration, like, you know, and it does require, so it does require like opening up that network, and it also requires the repetition, right? That's another piece that, again, if you're not familiar, I don't know what to tell you because I don't want to get into it right now, but like there is a piece of memory reconsolidation where the updated programming or the updated information or the updated belief, it's not enough to like show your system that once. You have to show your system that a few times in order for the memory reconsolidation to occur. And again, with the pacing, the rushing, the distraction, we don't do that as often as I think we might if we had like, not to be like, you know, pro going back to the dark ages, but if we had like a slower, simpler life, that to me, it feels like that would just more naturally occur. I think the last piece that I want to fold in here around this idea of like reprocessing an event is from the nervous system level. I think there's a way in which we have been talking about it at kind of the story and the narrative and the context level. I think the other way to reprocess it, and I'm interested to hear, Molly and Amy, your thoughts on this, is from the safety cues and threat cues level. Like if we are looking at an event that transpired and we're noticing what felt really threatening to us, but then actually, like, was that truly a threat? Like, were we actually in danger? So can I reframe how my system interpreted that as like less of a threat or not a threat at all? And then the second piece is, in that moment, as I'm looking back on it, can I find safety cues that were not pinging me at the time? Like, can I actually look at that picture, that past event, and see places where I was safe or where I was supported that I was filtering out at the moment? And that recodes it at the nervous system level.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always bringing in like ultra endurance running as a reference in this, but this is so up for me. And I think it parallels human life perfectly. You know, in a long race or a long run, it's a given that there are going to be really difficult, shitty moments, and you're not going to feel good. It's a given. Like, I don't think there's anybody who could do 100 miles and feel great the whole time, not even the fastest people on the planet. So that being said, if one wants to do that, I just signed up for one, by the way, next year. So like, I'm really thinking about this now. The trick, it's your mind. The physical training is there, but the trick is in your mind. The tricks are in your mind. And part of it, which I have not been great at, to be honest, in the past, is like not anticipating what's going to go wrong, but just accepting that stuff is going to go wrong, accepting that you're going to feel shitty, accepting that you might get nauseous or whatever, and then creating a plan for what will I do when that happens, and how can I. And I think this safety thing is very much a part of that. How can that be okay? I'm still moving forward. My stomach doesn't feel good. I'm going to take my ginger chews and it's going to get better eventually. And I think the parallel to, like, so I'm kind of talking about future sourcing, like, what am I going to do when the thing goes wrong that, that I don't want to have happen? Well, it's probably going to happen at some point. In life, it's probably going to happen at some point. Let's talk about like Thanksgiving dinner, right? Like, we're hosting all my husband's family, and we're a blended family. So that includes like a parent, and an ex. And so far in those situations, we've been just fine. But who knows? Like, the what I can do to set myself up here, though, is very similar to planning my 100-miler, right? I can know that there may be some stressful moments, and I can know, like, what resources do I have? What am I going to do if there's a tense moment and I need to leave the room, or, whatever. There's lots of ways you can think about this. I think as humans, though, we don't learn to plan for what could go, what could be uncomfortable. I was going to say what could go wrong, but what could be uncomfortable. We kind of expect that things are, or we hope and expect that things are just going to go smoothly. And then we almost like take offense when they don't always. So part of this is just like, how can I build resilience by knowing myself, knowing what I need, having some tools, having some scenarios worked out in advance that, like, if and when that happens, it's all going to be okay. So that's a kind of future planning. And I think the reflection and the integration, going back to the past memory, well, I had a like tense conversation with that person, but as you were saying, Molly, but everything was okay. But we laughed about it 10 minutes later. I think so much of this is just how we think about it.
I love what you're saying, Amy, and I definitely agree that as humans, especially looking ahead to the holidays, there's very much like a binary approach to thinking about it that happens. Either this thing is going to be totally awful and I dread it, or it's going to be amazing and I'm only like really looking forward to it. And it's easy to be in one of those moods when in fact something is going to happen, even if a lot of the like situation around it feels like it's going to be fine. this year, part of what's happening is that my mom is going to come with me to my partner's house where their family is doing Thanksgiving. And right now, everything seems set up really well. But I know going forward that like things are definitely going to come up. And I love what you're saying about just being like, what are some of these things that could come up, right? And what do I do in those situations? For instance, something that happens to me that I've needed to learn to do differently is when something's happening that I'm feeling really triggered by, and I'm actually already in conversation with someone at the time, it's really hard for me to calm down in the moment. Like, it's like, even though part of my brain is thinking, okay, like, how do you get out of the situation? What do you do? Do you need to take a break? It's like processing what I need to do. But the other half of me is still trying to continue to have the conversation and look like nothing's happened. That makes it extremely difficult for my nervous system to calm down in that situation. So what I've learned is I actually need to leave the situation, go to the bathroom, get a drink, take some time to myself, maybe do some tapping, maybe do some bilateral stimulation, and like let my nervous system process just one thing at a time, and then I can come back to the situation. Otherwise, handling those two tasks at the same time just means I feel increasingly frustrated and increasingly stressed. And even when the conversation ends, it takes me a lot more to get back to a calmer place.
Ooh, you guys, I am just gonna bookmark some channels we have open. Amy brought up this idea of like psychological flexibility and of it actually being in our head. And it's so funny. I feel like with my parents, this comes up a lot. Like we know our kid is going to act a certain way and we still don't get ahead of it. I think earlier, Molly, I really want to hear about like your particular take on the holidays, like when you're dealing with stuff that's pretty deep during the holidays. And then Joy, you just mentioned these tools that I think at some point we now have to demo, which is the faster EFT and the bilateral. So those are all things I just wanted to bookmark.
Where do we want to go next?
Well, if you got, so let me just say, I want to do a callback to what Amy was saying really fast, because this idea of like, if we're pretty sure something's going to happen and we can actually plan for it, that's, to me, that's low hanging fruit. And it's applicable in a lot of holiday situations, right? Like, and Joy just actually gave a really great example of that, where she's like, I know I get into this space in difficult conversations. So if I know that I'm likely going to have a difficult conversation, I can have these kind of pre-planned excuses to excuse myself, like I can just pre-plan, like, okay, like the drink station is over there. Like that's one exit. And actually that feels really good to our nervous system. Orienting to our exits when we first get into a situation, like the bathroom's over there, check. The drinks are over there, check. Like the front door's over there. I can pretend I forgot something in my car. So that's low hanging fruit and really useful. And even if we don't have to use those exits, just the fact that like we oriented to them, that's helpful for our little nervous system.
I just wanted, can I insert something in here? Because just to attach to your point, what we're talking about really is getting ahead of the fear of the unknown. Because like, I am a person who fears the unknown. If I think, oh, like something might happen, and then I don't actually think through it, it's so much worse than if I think through it and have a solution. So, what you were just saying about like the difficult conversation or the conversation with the person who triggers something in you, like just like Celestina was saying, having the exits planned, having even like a line you say like, oh my gosh, I drank so much, gotta use the bathroom. Like having a way that in advance that you can take care of yourself. I just will speak personally for me, having those little solutions on hand, thinking about them in advance, it takes away most of the anxiety. It really does. Because the anxiety comes from, oh shit, what if that happens? And then not working through it.
And I just wanted to add that you can do that from like a confident, hopeful, steady place. Because I think that there's an anxiety place where we're like, oh God, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? But you can do it from the like long distance running place, which is like, I have intended that I'm going to do this 100 miles. At some points of it, it's going to be uncomfortable. I feel confident and steady and hopeful in my planning for it so that I know that I'll be prepared.
Ooh, can I just say something that I almost forgot and you just reminded me, Joy, that I wanted to bring into this conversation, and I'm doing it now, is this idea of connecting to our own agency as being a way of reducing stress. And I think a lot of times, again, in the context of the holidays, it can feel like so overwhelming, like we have to do all this stuff, like it's totally out of our control, you know, like we have to host or we have to show up, like we can't say no or we can't do things differently. I think another thing that on the nervous system level is incredibly calming is being able to connect to our agency, even if that is that corny mindset shift of like, I don't have to do this, I choose to do this. You know, like if we can actually make that land authentically for ourselves, then, or just any way that you can connect to your agency. Like, I have to go to this thing that I don't really want to go to, but like I'm going to make sure I wear comfortable clothes. Like I'm going to be in charge of what I wear so I feel good in my body. Or like however it is that you're connecting to that sense of like, I actually have influence over my own life. I get to have choices. I get to feel like I'm in control, because it's true, like feeling like you're in control on the one hand, life is very out of our control. And on the other hand, it is important to our nervous system to feel like it's in control.
And having the why, I kind of having the why too, like for instance, the big family dinner, right? Where you maybe start to feel the pressure, but why are we doing this? Like, what are the things we're looking forward to? Like there's a larger reason we're doing this. And that is what's important. And when those uncomfortable feelings might crop up here or there, or like some tension or stress, like, you know, dealing with those, yeah, like in the way we have planned, but keeping your focus on the larger why.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, so again, Amy, this is a callback to your whole like beautiful diatribe about long distance running. Have you guys heard of ACT therapy? I don't know what ACT stands for, but it's a way of basically relating to suffering or pain or like something that's difficult or stress. And it has these like principles. And so the 6 principles are acceptance, which Amy, you definitely spoke to that, right? Like even just accepting that things are going to be hard makes it so much less difficult when they're like, it doesn't blindside us. We're just like, oh yeah, like life isn't supposed to be easy all the time. Okay, check. It's okay when it's hard. Nothing's actually wrong. Check. So acceptance, cognitive diffusion, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, but being present is another one. Like not letting our mind get into that monkey mind place of like, what if this happens? Just like, okay, like be here now. And I know that's like so corny, but it's so true. Self as context, not really sure what that means. Values. And this is where I think the why, this is the values piece is around the why, right? Like the bigger picture, how does this relate to what's important to me? And then committed action, which I think we've been talking about, right? Like that pre-planning, and committed action is also that connection to agency. Like I can take action. I am not completely helpless. But the other piece that I wanted to say is like, there's this piece around the words we use and the stories we tell that can take the charge up or down, right? Like if we're going into a difficult holiday gathering, there's a way in which we can spin ourselves up. Like, this is going to be the worst thing ever. Oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to survive this. Like, and we can spin ourselves up just with like the stories in our head versus like choosing a different story, you know, like I have all these tools available to me. I have ideas of what I can do when things get really tough. You know I can get through this. This might actually be better than I think it is. It's only like just the way we talk to ourselves about a certain stressor or a certain experience of pain matters so much, you know, like even if we're like sick or hurt, like, oh my God, this pain is so bad, like I want to die, versus like, you know what? this is going to get better soon. It can't always hurt this bad. So just choosing the words in the stories is like another piece that I want to fold in. And that's what I think of when I think of ACT therapy as well. Yeah, so that was me getting back to Amy. So checking that off. Demonstrating these somatic practices. And then Molly, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, everything you're saying definitely coincides kind of the angle that I'm taking and have been taking the last few holidays. So I'm gonna give it a little bit of a heading, which I think is helpful, and that is like Zen holidays, like really approaching the simultaneous experience of the holidays, where we have all this expectation for joy and fun, while also navigating something that's present in life that's very difficult. So I'm just referring to specifically, like, examples might be going through a divorce, if someone, you know, in your close personal circle has cancer, or another, you know, life threatening illness possibly, or just a really acute illness, a death, a recent death, or a death that has happened even in the past few years. That's just something that families are bringing with them into the holidays, just knowing that they're going to be facing a lot of grief alongside this expectation that everything is supposed to be rosy. And what I have found to be true is that I have like my regular life discomfort, like kind of garden variety, standard issue, life is uncomfortable. And then when you're in a situation that is just, I would say, something more devastating, that's like a next level. And that's where I land, where I need something, I need more. I need something that works in the most dire of situations. And so for me, I have found the work of Pema Chodron, like The Places That Scare You is the book that I'm rereading right now. When Things Fall Apart was probably the first one I read about a decade ago. And honestly, like, that would be an example of a time, like, I read the book and I wasn't in a devastating situation and I couldn't even read the book because, like, I'm like, I can't even read this right now because I'm so afraid of that happening. But once you're in a situation that maybe you have really feared, and here it is, I find it just tremendously supportive. And so some of the ideas there are that I find really supportive is a principle. It's a Buddhist practice of Tonglen. And it's basically recognizing that, I would call the principle behind it is really recognizing the universality of your experience and finding a shared experience. So even when I was thinking of you, Celestina, when you're thinking about like how many other people don't want to be at that event, and actually sharing this experience of discomfort and recognizing like there's so many other people that are feeling this too. And so for me, like, I'm going through something really challenging with one of my kids that's breaking my heart. And I spend time meditating on how many other moms are suffering right now. And it takes me to this tender place where I'm softening and relaxing into the pain. I'm not denying it. I'm letting it be there. And I'm letting that become a shared experience where I'm not thinking I'm alone in the world. I'm thinking there are millions probably of other moms with broken hearts this holiday. And so the practice is actually like breathing in and relaxing and letting that pain be there. And then when you, on the out breath, you send comfort and you send like love to all these other moms.
Can I just tell you what that reminds me of?
Hmm.
One thing that I do with my parenting clients is we connect to the parenting field. And it's this idea of all the parents ancestrally who have come before you, who exist around you, who will come into the future. And just this like space of like shared resource and support that you can just tap into. And I love that you can also send into that, like the way that you were saying, like you can send comfort out. But also like I love that idea of universality and of just being able to tap into like it is kind of like energetic spiritual support, right? It's these like energetic ley lines, but that's what that reminded me of. And it doesn't have to be the parenting field, you know, if it's
Right.
if whatever the thing that you're struggling with, the field of all the people who have gone through that, who have learned from that, who have resources to share around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who are going through it,
Are
who are
currently
experiencing it right here, right now.
who can give
Yeah.
you the,
Yeah. And I think the idea being, yeah, that you can soften and experience it and not harden and not, armor up against it. Is just it. I have found it to be such a beautiful, like connecting experience. And then I fold into it kind of similar to what we've talked about before, but I then also will be like, and I'm on my bed. So like really getting into a supportive, like the somatics of support, and I'm in my shower and I can feel the hot water, and I'm in my home and I have food and I have like, so really becoming mindful of all of the ways that I have support through the situation, and I have friends that I can text. So I love like folding in the somatic experience of support and training my awareness to look for safety. And what I have found to be true is that I have overcoupled threat with heartbreak. So when I can differentiate that my heart really aches right now and I am safe. Another piece to bring in there, and I also can differentiate, I can feel my broken heart and I can feel that my hands are okay, my legs are okay. Like my body has these other places that feel neutral or fine or okay. So we're just teaching kind of that field. We're training our field of awareness to feel more than the hyper focus of whatever, whether it's stress or pain or, distress, and creating safety around the emotion so that we're not coupling fear with these other forms of emotional distress. So those are just some very active practices I have. And it seems like there was one other I was going to share today. Well, I'm going to just stop there. Thoughts? What do you guys have around that?
Oh my gosh, I feel like you just in a macro way, like I feel like that's the key to life in some ways, right? You can have it in these big, uncomfortable, heartbreaking moments. You can have it in the smaller ones, but what you just spoke to, like the feeling for what it is and looking for cues of safety, man, if we nail that, I feel like life is a different kind of experience. That's really beautiful.
I totally agree. So I'm going to actually go, the other place I take this to is that right there changes the quantum field. So now if we want to get like creating the future, because every time I'm able to soften into my experience, I am a different person. So whereas before, and actually I shouldn't say before, like this is before, after, and this isn't over. I can contrast that when I allow myself to stay in an anxious state and anxious thought patterns around an experience, I bring my activated nervous system to the circumstances. So just using the example, like I could be walking up behind my son and I'm in such an anxious state that I start going after him, like lecturing him or giving him a hard time because I am trying to control or manage, versus when I am tending to my heart, it stays so soft. And the way that I interact with him, then there's a whole new field of possibilities. So like my ripple effect in the world, I am so much more powerful for creating the relationships that I want to create and the experiences I want to create and stay in my like integrity when I am staying and maintaining like support for the softness of the experience. And that's where brand new possibilities open up as far as how I can relate to somebody.
Molly,
Like, something
I just
different.
have to say that is so Dr. Joe.
Oh, this is so Dr. Joe. And I
That's
get it now.
coming
Now
of-
I'm like, oh, I get it. We think
love that.
who these things are. That's like when you go back to that, you know, a new personality. This is not a personality. These are trained patterns, conditioned patterns when we did not have resources. And then they just got repeated that we think it's us. This is just who I am in the holidays. And so we could be, you know, if we look at the holidays through that lens, like, oh, I hate the holidays because I know who I'm going to be. And it's like, no, you could actually be, you could be Zen. You could be totally Miss Zen holiday.
I love that so much, Molly. And you know, the part that I'm like really picking up on too is that softness is the resource. Being together is the resource. Like when we feel like isolated and excluded and like no one could possibly understand what our experience is like, then we're like these individual little cubes. But how many people out there are experiencing something really similar? And I do think consumerist culture, that like lots of culture is telling us we're like one person, we're individual, we're each individually under threat in different ways. You want to solve your like individual problem, but recognizing how connected everybody is by a similarity of experience and a similarity of pain in those similarities. Like you don't need to shield yourself when you realize that other people are experiencing the same thing. I really do think what you're saying, like, it's this isolation, this perceived unique fucked upness of our situations that like keeps us from each other and also keeps us from ourselves, because if you're uniquely fucked up and nothing's going to be able to change for you, like, well, hopelessness is the place to be.
That's right.
You know, Molly, kind of a little bit around what Joy is saying, what I really picked up, or what you were saying made me remember, is this idea of the fact that our nervous systems are connected in a very mycelial way with other nervous systems. And it's not something that we can necessarily see. And it's not something that we necessarily even acknowledge in Western culture. But I think I was, you know, even when you were giving the example of your son, like if your nervous system is showing up in a different way, you're going to act a different way towards him. But even if you weren't outwardly acting, it would still be different. Like the nervous systems would still be talking and really picking up on what the other nervous system is doing or feeling. And so I think when we're talking about like calming down or stress reduction, more and more, again, in this very individualistic culture, I see stuff that's very much about self-regulation, right? Like of like, you know, how I talk to myself or exercising. And you're reminding me now to fold in this piece of like co-regulation. And also this idea, even if you don't necessarily have someone or something you can co-regulate with, like the holidays might be tough because you are totally alone, or like your dog just died, so you lost your like co-regulator. The way that you are describing this Tonglen practice, like you can co-regulate with other people on this energetic level. And I will also say, as silly as it seems, you can co-regulate with strangers. Like you can go to the mall and just walk behind a happy family. You can go to the grocery store and intentionally involve the clerk in conversation and like give them well wishes. Even those tiny, tiny little social encounters of like exchanging a smile with someone on the plane, that does it for our systems. And that is how socially we are attuned, that even this little bit of care from a stranger will do a thing. So that's
Totally.
Yeah.
And water, like the shower and the ground, and
Yes.
the sky and the trees and the bird, like
yes, all the other
everything
things
can co-regulate. So and it starts with just an idea of that, like I didn't know, But as soon as you know that idea, you can start practicing it with it, and you can start to see like there's so much available for us, and it's teaching us to become aware. Our natural neurological state is to look for threat, because that's what keeps us safe, but it doesn't keep us well. And so when we train our awareness on seeking, where do I have support, just like you said, it's powerful. It's like turning on a channel that we weren't taught. Nobody taught us to do this.
Were you the one that offered the question? It's a discernment question. And the question is like, am I really unsafe or am I just uncomfortable? Did I get that from you, Molly?
Well, I say it, but I think we've said it. I think Amy, I think everybody said it, but I like to think of it, can I differentiate between the two?
Because I love what you said earlier about your system overcoupling threat with heartbreak. I think universally, at least again in Western culture, we overcouple threat with pain. So any kind of pain is perceived as a threat. And the response is like, cancel it ASAP, let's get away from it as fast as possible, versus being like, is this pain actually a threat? Like, do I need to soften into it, sit with it? Is there a message here for me that I need to stick around and hear? So this practice of distress tolerance until we can discern whether the pain is an actual threat versus whether it's just something we actually just need to be with or let wash over us, or, metabolize organically in the way that life does. Yeah. And then the last thing I want to say, this idea of the way our body works, its number one priority is keeping us alive. And I think I got this from my teacher, Linda Tai. She had this sentence around like, we can be alive, but at the expense of living. And I think a lot of times that's what happens. It is like survival at the expense of any thrival.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that.
And we just don't know any different. That's where I think recognizing like this is all learned. This is something that we can learn.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
where it's life changes, versus I think a lot of times we think of change being like really like willpower and difficult and hard, instead of really seeing it as just, these are just skills that we practice, and the consequence is that life is softer. Life is,
different possibilities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The field shifts. Yeah.
Can I bring up a practical in the moment application of what you were talking about, both Molly and Celestina, with like co-regulating, whether it's with another person or whether it's with a tree, and this is like this was really helpful to me. My husband is going into his third year of somatic experiencing training, and he already uses a lot of it, but there was a situation where we just moved to the mountains, and we live on a dirt road, and there's, as you turn onto our dirt road, you kind of go up a corner, and then there's this like severe drop off with no guardrail. There's a couple of houses there, but it's a kind of a grassy field, but it goes straight down, and there's nothing there, like, and the dirt road's not super wide. So, and I have a bit of a fear of heights. And when we first moved there, I thought, okay, like, yeah, I'm going to get used to driving on this dirt road. And we got an email that was sent around from like the kind of the unofficial mayor of the neighborhood. And he was talking about snow plowing and road conditions. And he said something about, we need to make sure that the road condition in that spot where the drop off is good, because, he said something like, going off the road there could be life-threatening or something. And I read that email, and oh my whole system got so activated. It was a Saturday morning, and I had just come home from a run or something, and my husband was in the house, and I read the email, And I burst into tears. Like, that's how activated I was. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do when the road is snowy? And what if we go off the road? And, and he was so great. He had me grab onto his forearm with both of my hands. So I can't really demonstrate it, but I'll demonstrate it with these stress balls. And he just had me squeeze as I let out my emotion around it. He just had me like squeeze his forearm. And it was almost like I was allowing the emotion, but I was moving the fear of this situation just like into another organic substance, which was his forearm. And I can't tell you how grounding that was for me. I'm still a little bit afraid of that part of the road, but it's like, it gave me somewhere to put that energy.
Completing the stress response.
With,
We have
yeah.
to talk about that. That is one thing that I wanted to fold in here, but that's a beautiful example of completing the stress response. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that's, what somatic experiencing, part of what it's about is completing the stress response so we don't internalize it and then relive the trauma and the stress in all these other situations. So I wanted to bring that up as an example, perhaps for the holidays, of if you have someone in your life that can be on board with this and you can do it for each other, like that is a great, like just to like squeeze someone's forearm or squeeze their leg or, something where it's another human body. And if we don't have that, like I said, like stress balls or just like squeezing your own arms, like can be so powerful in situations that are, either like, physically threatening. Some people are afraid of flying or being in, long car trips, or just the uncomfortable social situations or, any of that.
Oh my gosh. So Amy, I feel like you just really beautifully moved us into a place where we can do demos of stuff that is like
I was thinking the same.
pragmatic and somatic. So I will, as long as we're talking about squeezing stuff, I'll just offer a quick one. What can feel good is like grabbing the thumb and wrapping, because it like, especially if we sucked our thumb, this can like harken back to that like suckling response, and it can feel really good. So you can just take your hand, wrap your thumb, and then just grasp your thumb and then just play with squeezing that way. You can do it like this, squeeze like that. So yeah, there's a ton, and there's a ton of resources out there in terms of what you can do. But I love like, because the squeezing is one particular type of stress response. The stroking and the more gentler stuff is actually another type of stress response. So even in the somatic stuff, we can differentiate and like really tune into like what our nervous system needs in terms of like the right completion to the exact stress response. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll fold in a couple here too. You can, just while you're sitting, really slowly pick up like your right leg and then your left leg, and just do that a few times. And it's a really low adrenal way to actually move away. Like, I need to move away from this situation. Like if you're thinking about a situation where maybe you stayed and you felt like you had to stay, like you sat at the dinner table, when you reimagine it, you can actually move your legs like that. And it simulates, I'm walking away, I'm moving away. My body wanted to leave and I stayed still, and I'm going to fulfill that need to walk away now whenever I think about that memory. So,
and I want to fold in the inverse too, because that, to me, that's a place where like we wanted to fight or flight, and instead we flopped or froze. There's also the opposite that, again, I'm harping on Western culture here. It happens a lot in Western culture. There's the opposite where we wanted to actually flop or freeze, and we fight or flighted.
yes.
To me, that alludes to like when we actually needed rest and stillness and support, but we pushed through and we made ourselves do a thing. So I feel like what I want to fold in now, you can kind of imagine, I don't know, maybe should I grab all my pillows, or like a large stuffy, or like one of those big rubber exercise balls where you just let your body like fold over. You can use yoga bolsters. I will sometimes like stack like 3 big pillows and just like let my body like hang over it. And that can be a really beautiful, again, the inverse of that situation where like we actually needed to let ourselves rest and we pushed ourselves, and then just letting ourselves be totally supported can be really a good release and feel really lovely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think it also feels like a good time to demo EFT and bilateral,
Yes.
partially because so EFT, emotional freedom technique, is a really good way to engage with a situation both like cognitively and physically at the same time. So it does that completion of the stress response that Celestina was talking about. But if you're a person who often has a lot of thoughts about things, it also lets you move through and sort of with the thoughts, similar to if you were, you know, being carried by a river and you're just sort of letting yourself be carried by the river and also recognizing that you're in it. Do you think it makes sense to do a demo right now? Okay, let's do it. So the reason I like tapping so much is because I'm a person who has a lot of thoughts. And often I'm a person who has a lot of thoughts about the thoughts that I'm having. So for instance, if you're in a situation and you're feeling uncomfortable, you're feeling sad, you're feeling upset, and then you also have the thought like, oh, I shouldn't be sad, I shouldn't be upset, I should be calm. And then you have another level of thoughts like, I'm a coach, I'm a person who's a therapist, I'm a person who's gone to therapy, and I should be able to accept myself for having these mad, sad, upset thoughts that I have. At this point, you have sort of like a cauldron of thoughts that are happening. And my favorite thing about EFT is that you can actually just verbalize those things to yourself. This is what I like to do with my clients as well. The most basic version is actually to start with a simple statement like, I acknowledge this feeling and let it go. But I like to let whatever is coming up in your mind at the time as you're moving through the different points. And so the first point that you start tapping is just the top of your head. And you can do this with one arm, you can do it with the other arm, you can do it with both at the same time if it feels good to you to have this sort of symmetrical response. And you might say something like, I'm feeling mad and upset in the moment, and I don't like that I'm feeling that way. So you can acknowledge whatever you're feeling in the moment. And then the next point you move to is between your eyes. And maybe you're saying something like, I can feel that I'm judging myself for even having feelings, and that I'm judging myself for not being able to accept those feelings. And the next point is side of the eye. And at some point during this, whether it's as you're going through the cycle or on the next loop, you'll find that your thoughts start to shift. Like you might think something like, I'm starting to feel like it's okay to feel this way. And here's another point below the eye. I'm starting to feel like I might be okay with being sad with this. And then the last point, my favorite, is where you sort of thump your chest and maybe you say something like, I could see how I could let this go in a few minutes, even if I'm not feeling that way right now. And then the last step is to take your hand. Oh, this is the squeezing. And you put it around your wrist and you squeeze it. Breathe in, breathe out twice as long. Completing that stress response. And actually, you can do that again. So you put your hand around your wrist, you breathe in, breathe out. Sometimes I like to visualize the stuff that I'm holding landing on the floor when I'm breathing out. And you can take yourself through as many loops of this as feels good in the moment. I mean, we already talked about the quantum field, so like not to get woo about this, but tapping also interrupts reactions that you're having. So for instance, that feeling where you're like, oh, I feel like I'm getting sick. And if you're feeling like you're getting sick and then you're like, oh, now I feel like I'm getting even more sick. Now I'm like noticing things going on in my throat. I'm like noticing I'm chilly. You can actually interrupt those kinds of responses with tapping as well. And so I don't tend to say anything for those, but I'll be like, okay, I may or may not be getting sick. And so you can go through a loop of that for physiological responses as well, which I think can often happen during the holidays.
So you're tapping with like these 3 fingers, is that right?
I usually use 3, but you could use 2, or you can even use your like whole hand if you want to. And oh, thank you for reminding me. Sometimes when I'm not feeling like looking like I'm doing something, I'll just imagine myself tapping, and that helps me as well. So I'll be like, oh, going through tapping in my mind.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
this is really great for if you're in the middle of a situation. Let's say you're at the Thanksgiving Day table, someone says something, maybe even unintentionally, that starts to bother you. You can excuse yourself to the bathroom and give yourself a break, and just acknowledge all the feelings that are going through you rather than pushing against them. Like, why am I feeling shitty right now? Why does this person have to do this? Instead of doing that, you can say, I'm feeling kind of shitty about this person who said something. And then as you let yourself have the feelings and also do the physiological part of the tapping, then those feelings are acknowledged and you can let go of them without needing to be like, I gotta let go of this right now. I don't want to be the asshole at the table, like any of those other things where you're just trying to move away as rapidly as possible or push against something.
and I think like I'm just gonna say I come from such a scientific background. I do think it's important. This is called emotional freedom technique, and I feel like it does fall on the more woo side of things. And also, these are acupressure points, and there is a way in which when we're tapping these points, neurological changes do happen. And so that's the piece that I want to fold in here as we're showing you some of these more somatic regulation techniques. There is a very neurobiological reason why they work. And, I think we can speak a little bit to that. For the people for whom psychoeducation in and of itself is regulation, like for the people whose nervous systems are calmed by information. Yeah, tapping. And I think the last piece I want to add around tapping is it's great for, to me, this is maybe more of a personal opinion, it's great for like acute in the moment, like you said, Joy, where you can excuse yourself and actually bring yourself down in real time. To me, it's also something that can be a lovely like morning or evening ritual to just fold in daily. Where like if you're doing it in the morning, you can kind of tap on like, how do I want to feel? What do I want to focus on? And in the evening, you can, before bed, especially if you're someone who has trouble sleeping or has like nighttime anxiety, you can tap on like the day's stressors before you go to bed. So it's a nice thing to fold in as a ritual.
When you say tap on the day's stressors, just to help someone understand, like what kinds of things are you saying, or what kinds of things are you thinking as you're tapping on the day's stressors?
So I think, kind of circling around to what we were talking about before, there's a lot of stuff that happens that's stressful during the day that we don't have time to fully process or integrate. So using the tapping as a way to facilitate the integration. So, for example, like maybe I'm just going to use the parenting example because that's my life right now. There's a moment where like you're picking your kid up from school and there's like a lot of hustle and bustle, and like a teacher says something that's a little destabilizing, like, like Christopher had kind of a hard day today, but then like your kid's already pulling you towards the car, so you don't get to ask the teacher like what they meant or whatever. And so it gets stuck in your system as a like, oh, question mark, like that didn't feel good. You might tap on like, at the end of the day, that might look like, that felt really disorienting to my system to hear that. Like, I trust my kid, I trust myself, I'm going to let this go. That kind of processing of the day's stressors. That was just a random example, or it could be like, during the holidays, these stupid work deadlines that like always seem to happen right before Christmas. Like, you know what, everything's going to be okay. Like, I'm not, what did we used to say? It was always like, at least I'm not a surgeon. Like, the worst that can happen is that this project is delayed. I'm not going to actually kill someone if I don't make this deadline. Whatever And I think it is important to begin to identify that self-talk or that self-soothing talk that you can fold in. And that is unique to some people, especially with tapping. I know some people will actually bristle at like, I'm letting this feeling go, because their system actually doesn't want to in that moment let the feeling go. So it is important to find the language that actually is soothing to you. You know, like, work is stressful and it matters a lot to me. And I do want to get this project turned in on time. And I'm just acknowledging that this was part of the, you know, part of the stress of the day was getting reminded about this big project and this looming deadline. And you don't have to let that go. You can just describe it.
I really appreciate you adding that part, Celestina, about the language. And one funny thing that's happened with me with a client as well is that you don't even need language. You can be like, "Arr!" Or in this case, it was like,
kitty tapping. I love it.
Yeah, love that. Cool. Do you want me to at least introduce the topic of bilateral?
Yes.
Demo it.
Yeah, so I love both of the techniques. I love EFT and bilateral stimulation, which is something we learned in our training, our integrative change work training. And it's not unique to that. Like, there's lots of ways of incorporating bilateral stimulation. So the idea is that you have the two hemispheres of your brain. And when you're feeling really stressed out, one hemisphere is more active than the other. They're not very balanced. So by incorporating some kind of movement across the body, on both sides of the body, moving, you're engaging both hemispheres and bringing them back onto line. So the simplest we learned in our training is you just take an object. You could even do this maybe without an object, but an object kind of helps keep it focused. And, you know, you're feeling some stress and you're literally just passing this object back and forth between your hands. You're crossing the midline of your body. And, you know, as the ball goes from your right hand to your left hand, you're actually engaging the opposite sphere of your brain. So left sphere, right sphere, etc. You can do this like for 30 seconds or a minute. And just kind of notice how it, for me, it does make me calm down, or at least it like neutralizes the charge. This is something that you could do really inconspicuously. Well, this isn't inconspicuous. I have this bright blue ball in my hand, but just the moving back and forth. Like one thing my my therapist has used on me is tapping your lap, you know, right hand, left hand. And you could do this while you're talking to someone, right? Or you could like maybe squeeze your thighs or something like this. Anything that's like kind of using right and left hand. That's kind of why I brought the stress balls, because you can squeeze them. So there's like that kind of squeezing and moving out the nervous energy, and you can alternate hands. The other thing, like, it probably is so, you know, it's easily overlooked because it's so, you know, it's like such a regular part of our day, is if you're able to get out for a walk, move your body through space. And even better, and you know, this can't necessarily happen on Thanksgiving afternoon, but like during a weekend when you have like some stress or some like interactions, getting out and walking and talking. You could talk to yourself. You could be on a walk with somebody you trust and talk to them. There's something about the process of moving through space, foot to foot, moving yourself and actually expressing what you're expressing. That is, I can't tell you why. I'd have to do the research on this, but this is something my practitioner has shared with me, that it's in some ways even more effective than sitting still and talking about it. You're moving it through your body. So this is why I love bilateral, because there's so many ways to do it, and it can be super, super subtle. You could just do like this. Nobody would ever have to know. So
No, I love that. I love because walking is a form of bilateral. And I think like, you know, in a previous lifetime, I studied physics. And it was like part of the physics lore that when the physicians, when the physics people had like a brand new idea, they would go on a walk together. And there is something about walking that like changes the way the brain moves and adds this like really powerful metabolic function, which I've noticed for myself. But I will say, if walking is not your thing, again, it's so individual and there's so many different types of bilateral. So don't second guess yourself if you're doing a bilateral and you're not getting anything from it. Try a different bilateral. So I love the ones that you demoed, Amy. And do you guys know if it matters if we cross the body? So like, for example, the thighs, we could do this way or we could do this way. Does it matter?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I know the one that we
Crossing
learned
the
when we're
body.
doing this, we're crossing the body, but I have had my therapist have me do this. And I find this really comforting. So this is crossing the body. This obviously is not, but it's still
Walking is
engaging
better.
sides.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So the
I really
other,
like this one in the middle of the chest.
oh, that's a nice one. Yeah.
Like if you tap, this is one that my partner's therapist gave us. Like you can actually get some of that like chest tapping feeling at the same
This
time.
way, yeah. And then I like to do this one, which folds in havening, which is like,
Mm.
you can stroke instead of tap. And I liked Amy, you can squeeze. It kind of just depends. Again, like trust your nervous system. What do you need in the moment? You can squeeze. The other one that I'll fold in, again, because I think I want to just explicitly name, if we all know that if we're in a social function and we start doing something really overt and obvious, like we're not going to do it. It's too wacky and wild. And there are more subtle ways of doing it. And one subtle way of doing bilateral is, I'll throw out two. There's a way in which if you can have like earbuds in that are kind of innocuous, you can listen to bilateral beats. And if the earbuds are, transparency, you can kind of turn down the volume to where you're getting the bilateral beats, but you can also be in conversation. Bilateral beats is a great one. It is important that you do listen with headphones. It doesn't work the same way if you just listen where you don't have headphones, because different tones are coming in through each ear. And that is actually what is giving that bilateral stimulation. So that's one
That's a great tip.
yeah. The other one is using your eyes. So like, for example, if you're just talking to someone at the dinner table, if you're talking to someone, and if it feels subtle enough to you, you can just like gently bounce back from like one of their ears to the other, just like rock your eyes back and forth. If I am doing this type of bilateral with my clients, and if they're on a laptop, like the two edges of the laptop, it's a little bit maybe over a foot or it's like 14 inches. That's what laptops are. Just bounce your eyes from one corner of the laptop to the other corner a few times. That can be a more subtle way of bilateral stimulation. But even doing stuff like Amy was saying under the table with squeezing your hands, just kind of playing with like moving your hands and squeezing them rhythmically, play around with it. But I will say the overarching structure of bilateral is like you're using both sides of the body. And if you can add the crossing the midline piece in as well, and it has to be, at least with my understanding, fairly rhythmic and fairly rapid. And then those are like the components of bilateral stimulation. And after that, you can be creative and you can try a bunch of different movements that kinds of fits that framework of like both sides of the body, crossing the midline, fairly rapid, fairly rhythmic. But then the world is your oyster as far as what ends up working for you.
I wanted to add in one quick thing, which is you can actually, like on Zoom, like Amy was showing, like you'll see that this is me actually passing an object back and forth. And like pretty much no one can tell that you're doing something. But I also thought it was really important to point out, like with all the practices, like what Celestina was saying about the flopping and what Amy was showing with bilateral and what Molly was showing with the Tonlin practice, they get better as you do them more. And so if you're anticipating needing these tools when you're going into some sort of holiday event, it's really helpful to start doing them beforehand because our bodies are predictive. So the reason that, for instance, you drink water and then you are not thirsty isn't because the water already got to where it needed to be. It's because your body knows, oh, you drank the water, I'll get it later. So then it stops signaling you about it. And similarly with these tools, like now I can sort of almost just start doing bilateral and my body will be like, okay, it's calm down time. Like, because it knows that the calm down is coming. And so the more you use these tools, actually the quicker they start acting. So because your body understands that when you start doing this motion, that it's about to get the relief that it's been needing.
Oh yeah, I'll fold in one piece there. Just being incredibly realistic about, we're asking people to maybe start a new habit or a new pattern, and that can actually be very metabolically intensive. So and it was you, Joy, that mentioned this hack, that if you're being really honest with yourself and you're like, yeah, I don't really see myself practicing bilateral every day, a place to kind of meet yourself in the middle is the imagination, where like even while you're driving to pick up your kids, you're just imagining yourself doing it. And that can be almost as powerful, or maybe even as powerful, as actually physically incorporating the practice. So a lot of times and not to like bring it, really don't want to bring in exercise here because I don't love that, especially around the holidays. But if you're trying to bring in a new habit and it feels too metabolically intensive, you can play with just like imagining it daily or like kind of repetitively as kind of a bridge to actually physically bringing in that practice. So I'll just off, that's like a little hack / shortcut. I don't know.
Super great.
Yeah, I actually will say just one quick thing about to tie some of this together, like Molly, when Molly was talking about the Tonglen practice, you know, she talked about like changing at a quantum level. And that might have been when I was like, that's very Dr. Joe, because we both follow Joe Dispenza and I do his meditations a lot. And he talks about this. And that might sound kind of woo-woo, that changing at a quantum level, but what I just wanted to like highlight the concept, and in a way that might be kind of like for people who love woo-woo and for people who maybe don't and like more scientific. The idea in the quantum is that there's infinite versions of you. There's infinite realities, right? And I imagine them like spread out like an infinite deck of cards. You could be pissed off, and then there's all the other possibilities that are infinite. The idea by changing in the moment, like Molly was saying, softening, connecting your hearts to others, meditating on the other people who are going through what you're going through, is you literally are changing yourself in the moment. Some people like Joe Dispenza refer to it as you're becoming a different version of yourself. What he means is in that infinite quantum reality of all of the possibilities of you, you are literally like, you're almost like stepping into a different one. Now that idea can sound kind of woo-woo, but let me put it in a way that's like kind of simpler and neuroscience-y. And that is that what you are feeling and thinking and paying attention to is what your brain is literally wired to see. So again, like in that situation where you're anxious and you're frantic and your brain is looking out for more of that stuff and is going to pick up more of that stuff. When you do whatever the practice is, if it's a bilateral or it's a certain kind of meditation or it's tapping, and you change your response, your brain starts looking out for different stuff. So you are literally seeing different examples of
Different
things
data.
in your life. Yeah. So
it's getting through. Yeah.
So for somebody who might be like, well, those like sound like interesting practices, but like, why would I do them? How can this actually help my life in the short and long term? Like, that's how, like it's, you know, we don't have a lot of examples of this in our kind of contemporary life, which is very like, instant gratification. But like, if you are working on this stuff long term, you are going to start to see changes in what you see, changes in your own, you know, reality, changes like in your own being, and maybe even changes in the people around you, because you're going to start seeing, like Molly was talking about, other, you know, other responses from them because you're different.
Yeah. Can I give an example just so we can kind of see this? Because I think I used to think when I would hear people talk about, like, I don't know, I would get, it became like it was like this magical thing, like, I don't know. And I think it is very, I think it's actually very scientific. It's the difference between, I'm going to use the example of walking into a coffee shop, and you walk in to get a coffee and you're ruminating. I'm going to contrast that with meditating, which would be more like on purpose. So you're ruminating on something terrible that just happened that day, and you walk in the coffee shop and it's spinning, it's spinning, it's spinning in your mind. Your body is in a heightened state of awareness, and somebody, you're going to be attuning in that state to threatening, to any sign of threat. So if somebody walks in front of you, you might again code that as, that was really rude. And you're just strengthening the story you have about how much you hate people. And, you know, it's bah humbug, to bring it back to the holidays, right? Versus if you have a situation that goes down and you're able to do some bilateral support, for, as an example, in the car, and you walk into that coffee shop and you've resourced yourself, you've calmed your body down, literally all of a sudden now you're smiling at other people. The person that steps in front of you, you're like, you don't take it seriously at all. Like, it doesn't even faze you. You're noticing the beauty of the building, and you meet somebody next to you who, I don't know, I'm just going to make up, like, it's somebody that you end up becoming friends with, or there's a business opportunity.
Business partner,
like,
yeah.
that's exactly right. So because your state was so different, and if you take that, like, multiply that out a million times, like, you're moving through the world in a different state, all of these opportunities open up before you at any moment. And that's where your life really changes. And so it's like the momentum and the ripple effect and the energetic output from your body is drastically different when you're constantly resourcing yourself and helping your body come down. So does that, I don't know if that's the best example. I'm so many examples of this, but I feel like the same thing. If you're approaching, if you go to work expecting it to be a terrible day, you're going to have a terrible day. If you go to work, like, every time you see even that person that, like, if you've done Tonglen with a person who struggles, you're going to have warmth in your heart when you see them, as opposed to, God, I can't stand that person. So it's like you're constantly opening up a field of possibilities when you recognize that your emotional state sets this, it sets the path. It's constantly opening up new paths for you. So I think that it just can't be stressed enough, like, how impactful this is on your life. And every tiny little shift, that tiny little degree change, is monumental over the scope of a life. So it doesn't matter how tiny the little changes you're working at a time, that's still constantly steering you in a completely different direction.
I want to offer one of my favorite resources, especially for people who I think self-identify as a little bit more Eeyore-like and are like very allergic to anything that even remotely smacks of toxic positivity. I want to offer like a middle way, which I have found useful for myself, which is this concept of just neutral curiosity. So it's not like, oh, I have to like be positive about this, or like I have to bring in like this loving kindness energy everywhere I go. But it's like, let me just be really genuinely curious about what might happen that's different from what I'm expecting or projecting. So if I'm going to a holiday event that historically has been very difficult, this time I'm going to go in just being really curious about, like, am I actually getting this right? What actually is going on here? Even curious about what's going on in my body, just curious about, like, when I walk in the door, why do I tense? So curiosity can be a very good, neutral, powerful resource to bring with you anywhere and everywhere.
I had this aha recently that basically comedians are just awake. That's it. It's like there are so many hysterical things happening all the time, but most of us are just going through, we're not noticing them. Whereas a comedian is just observing. So I'm just throwing that out there because it's that same idea of like, if I could just neutralize and stop overlaying my interpretation for all this stuff and just be like, what is, like, I could go to a party I expect to be really stressful with the intention of, I'm going to look for things that are funny.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same idea. It's like, I'm going to teach my brain, I'm just going to invite my brain to consider something new here.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that like by doing that, you then are more present at the party because you're not in your own story about all the things you expect to happen or what it, you know, what every conversation with everyone means.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's endless playground. And that's where I think, you know, what I don't love about self-improvement or personal growth is the idea that we're fixing ourselves. There isn't a fix for the human experience. There doesn't need to be a fix for the human experience. It's really, can I open to more of it? Can I resource myself to have different experiences instead of always stressful? There's more to be had, you know. It's a richer, it's a wider range, and it's a more supportive kind of, again, if you go back to uncoupling the fear from so much of the, you know, half the human experience is uncomfortable or unpleasant. Like, okay, can I bring some resource, some support to that so that I feel resourceful. I feel resilient. Even Celestina, some of the things I love when a client comes to me and they're dreading an event, and you just alluded to like maybe a holiday event that you really aren't looking forward to, I will ask them, what's it going to be like afterwards? Like if we can start seeing that, we can start imagining and it's going to end and I'm going to be driving away. Like that's inevitable. And like, how do you want to feel? Like, I just want to feel proud of myself for going. Yeah, you did it. There was a reason you went. There's a reason. And when we can start seeing the after, you know, like you, Amy, you might imagine how good you're going to feel when you're done with that race and what you've accomplished. So it's like being able to expand out the lens with which we're looking at life. New Year's Day is going to come. And January 5th is going to come this year. Like the holidays are going to end. How do you want to feel when the holidays have come and gone and you rode through the ups and downs, because it's going to have all the ups and downs, and you could just be like, I did it, it's over, and there were some nice moments in there, and here we are in January. Like it's inevitable, it's going to come.
I love that. And I don't want to get too into it because I think this can be a separate conversation, but one thing this is making me think of is, and I think we alluded to it a little bit, Amy, when you were talking, lensing stuff through your values and your identity. So for example, again, going to something unpleasant, doing something unpleasant, where does that actually align with the identity that you want to have or the values that you do have? So like, yeah, the family event is unpleasant, but like family is actually a value of yours, you know, like family is important to you. So like you're willing to endure something that's a little bit more uncomfortable, but in some ways it is aligning with this value. So I think that can be a fun framework to play with as well. And you can actually do a lot of like really cool self-awareness and like deep identity work around the holidays if you do begin to lens it through like, where does this match the identity I want? Or like, where is this an old identity that I'm still holding on to for some reason? And why is it so hard to let go of? So all kinds of really fun questions there.
I want to give an example of that actually, sort of bringing it back to what I was talking about with, so like this year is one of the first times my mom's going to come and like join the Thanksgiving at my partner's parents' house. And going into it, anytime something new happens, you don't know what it's going to be like. And so there's already that sort of sense of like uncertainty, like how will people mix together? What are the things that we've done before going to feel like with another person? And there's also a language barrier in this particular case that I'm wondering, like, how much will I end up needing to step in as a translator, sort of the kinds of specifics that happen whenever you introduce a new person into a situation, which often happens during the holidays. But what I'm committed to, like, is that I'm committed to all being a family together. And I'm committed to taking care of my mom in that situation, whatever it ends up being like. And I'm sure that there will be times, calling back to what Amy's saying, when it's going to be uncomfortable or at least uncertain because a new element has been added to the situation. And so thinking about, at the end of it, like, I want to feel really proud of myself for having been a person to like bring our families together. And like, what does a person like that, how does a person like that act during that time? And I think that person, for instance, when something that, like, I don't know, comes up, would be like, okay, well, we're in a new situation. And so there are going to be new solutions for what happens. And just thinking about how that person that I want to be and like want to feel like at the end of this whole time would have acted during the situation. And I know, for instance, one thing that definitely wouldn't happen if I were that person is I wouldn't just be pissed off anytime something that was not something I expected happened, which I think can be easy to react like.
Yeah. And just I also, the one piece we didn't talk about, and I do want to fold in here, and I want to show you guys another somatic practice, and we're also coming down to time. So maybe we'll do like a follow-up at some point. Unshaming is something we didn't talk about. I think a lot of times we get down on ourselves, especially around the holidays, for the dissonance or the incongruence between how we wanted to have acted and what actually did end up happening. And there's such an important piece around, sometimes our nervous system will react in a way where it's trying to just keep us safe. And we can feel really shitty about that because it's probably an older survival mechanism that has kind of hacked the aspirational self that we wanted to be. And also, like, again, just unshaming that response. Our body was trying to take care of us. And when the nervous system does kind of rise up in an activated way, it actually does take our frontal lobes kind of offline. So there's a way in which, even if we wanted to kind of consciously do something about it, that part of our brain got switched off the minute our survival mechanism came to play. So again, just unshaming the piece that's like, oh, I should have done better. I should have done it differently. I wanted to do it differently. And just being really gentle with ourselves too around the holidays. Especially around these like old patterns of activation. And, again, to your point, joy of practicing stuff, we can mentally rehearse this. We can practice it a little bit just to introduce like a different way into our system. So we're not like being our aspirational selves for the first time in the actual situation. We can give ourselves those dress rehearsals as we're falling asleep at night, like, again, as we're driving, if we're really busy, we can multitask the imagination in to when we're doing stuff more on autopilot or just parts of our routine, like when we're brushing our teeth, just like, oh, how do I want to be? And just mentally rehearse it. Can I share with you guys this somatic exercise? I wanted to share because it introduces one thing that we didn't talk about necessarily, which is activating the vestibular system and also activating the phrenic nerve. So this is a little bit of polyvagal theory stuff, which I won't get into. Anytime we're activating the vestibular system, we're introducing a rhythmic, rocking, or prosodic element. So like the voice can get a little sing-songy. Even I'm noticing my body just completely unconsciously as the voice gets a little sing-songy, I'm going back and forth. But the reason activating vestibular system is a powerful calm down strategy is it takes our amygdala, which is that part of our lizard brain that is responsible for threat detection and threat response. It takes the amygdala down a little bit. It takes it offline a little bit. So when we introduce rocking, we also get that part of our brain that's like attuned to threat to chill a little bit. And then the last piece is the phrenic nerve piece. And the exercise I'll show you kind of works both in, but like even just turning the head side to side, doing like neck circles. This like just takes tension out of your neck, but it also activates that phrenic nerve, which has direct links to helping us calm down and helping the brain balance. So let me see. So you guys can see my bed, right? So this is, let me see if this is what I want to show you. I'm going to do it on my bed. Can you see me? Can you hear me or no? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So you will be doing this. You can do it on a bed, you can do it on a counter, or you can do it on a desk, where basically kind of put your hands down, you walk your legs out, and you push your hips back, and then you just sway side to side, just with your hips nice side to side. And this stretches your lower back, and it gets that vestibular motion in a really nice way. And then you can drop your head and just let your head kind of do whatever it wants, nodding, moving your head side to side, and just rocking the hips a little bit. Did you guys hear all that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So that's the piece. So you can do that, in the kitchen at an event. You can escape to the kitchen, do it on the kitchen counter. You can do it in the bathroom, like on the sink. It's great for if you can't do forward fold, this is like a yoga term, if that's too intense for your back, but just like rocking your hips side to side in that supported way, where like you have this beautiful, I think it also a little bit brings in that sense of wanting to feel supported in this way. So that for me is a powerful somatic thing to do that really helps just bring immediate relief and chill, zen, to use Molly's word, zenness. So that's my little somatic piece that I wanted to share, and just really letting your head drop and like rock side to side in that space. And I feel like we're kind of wrapping up at this point, and we can maybe have some space for concluding thoughts. But I think we've given people a lot.
Yeah, I want to add like another, just to go back, like listening to a podcast is co-regulation for me. Listening to an Audible book, especially if like I know that the author's voice is soothing to me. I have my go-tos. I have my go-to podcasters, my go-to Audible books. And yeah, just really realizing a lot of times too, another thing I'll do is I'll picture a circle of people who care about me, and I will full on put people I've never met in that circle, just imagining them holding hands around me. And it might be Brene Brown, and it might be, it could be you guys, and it could be Luis Mojica, like just people that have influenced my life in a positive way. So just really expanding that circle of possibility around co-regulation. So I think of this podcast just because I hope that we do become a community. I know that's like our intention, a collective of people who are learning how to support our bodies and take care of ourselves, so that we move through the world as a resource for others and have the ripple effect that we long to have on the world. And that starts with our own nervous systems.
I feel more relaxed.
Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely feel co-regulated since we started talking. So this was awesome.
I just wanted to add that we hope that you have the holidays that you want. And if you don't, that is also okay, because honestly, the holidays are overinflated, right? Like there are other times of the year that you can enjoy. And the other thing I wanted to add is, if you have questions, or if you have thoughts, or if you have comments, like please feel free to reach out to us. Like we would love to talk to you and talk through anything specific that's going on with you during the holidays. And we're here for you.
That reminds me, technically, and I've been leaving this in the show notes, but I haven't been speaking about it. And to be fair, this is only our 3rd episode. We do have an email where if you have questions that you want us to address on the podcast, you can send us an email. And the email address is collectivepocketchange@gmail.com, and that will be in the show notes. And that is something that we want to kind of officially invite, right? Joy, to your point, which I don't think we've done before. Reach out. We would love to go deeper into things that are issues on the podcast, but you got to let us know. And so we'd be very happy to hear from you. And I think, Joy, maybe what you were saying as well is like, if you are looking for deeper, more individual work, like all of us are available for that as well. Yeah, the holidays are challenging and complex and paradoxical. I guess maybe paradox is another idea that I'll leave, is like this idea that something can be good and bad at the same time. I'm always going to use good and bad in quotes, or like there can be things about it that you enjoyed and didn't enjoy, like kind of at the same time. And I am wishing everyone holidays that are about both surviving and thriving, however you make that happen for yourself. And again, just connecting to agency and just connecting to this idea that you are resourceful, you are resilient, and you do have this universal support that Molly spoke to.